Okay, so today this demo is going to show how Release Engineer can support multiple platforms, including non-IBM platforms like Endevor and Harvest. So in our last demonstration with Banorte, we showed integration with IBM Rational Team Concert. We demonstrated how Meister integrates into the RTC Jazz IDE to perform software compiles and links, or what we would call a build, using the code stored in RTC. And we also demonstrated a Meister workflow being called from RTC that executed a Release Engineer deployment to WebSphere. Today we are going to show a little bit more. We're going to show, also in our previous demonstration, we showed the specific Release Engineer benefits. For example, we showed agentless deployments. IBM UDeploy does not use an agentless technology. It uses in-targets, so an agent has to be installed on every machine. We showed roll forward and roll back and jumping versions, allowing you to move forward or backward to any version that you choose. We showed our calendar, approvals, how to package a software release, and we showed support for Harvest and RTC. For today, we're going to add to that demonstration support for what we would call non-IBM environments. We're going to take a piece of code from RTC, Harvest, and Endevor, compile the code, and create a release unit. We're going to take those release units, all three of them, and create a release. So UDeploy can't handle the management of a release. You would have to use uRelease to do that. So we want to highlight the things that we can do that UDeploy cannot. And the ability to manage more than one application is a feature that's unique to Release Engineer. We're also going to take the combined releases and we're going to deploy them to their environment, and then we're going to show you a rollback. So the way we have our demonstration set up today, we have Meister compiling the binaries for code that's stored into Harvest, Endevor, and RTC. Once compiled, Release Engineer will pull the binaries from Harvest, RTC, or Endevor, and then deploy them to WebSphere. On that, I am going to pass control over to Steve, who's going to do the demo.
Okay, so we have our environment up and running, and like Tracy said, we have our application that we're going to deploy from Endevor, Harvest, and RTC. So if you look at the beginning here, we have Endevor of our application running on our web server, which is version 1. Our Team Concert is version 1, and our Harvest is version 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Harvest and make a source code change into Harvest and start the process there. So here I have our source code for our Harvest version. We're going to make our update to signify that we're at version 2. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to check it in. Okay, so now we have the source code change checked into Harvest, that we are now going to go ahead and perform the compile. So let me bring up Harvest here. and we're actually going to use Harvest to kick off the build process. So you can see here we have our Harvest process to perform the Meister build. And we'll be able to watch this build execute. And like we have with Team Concert, Meister has been installed inside of Harvest, so you have a single GUI to work from. So we are actually in the Harvest client, and we are viewing the output of our build process from within Harvest. If we go look at our packages, we can see that we have checked in our WAR file into Harvest. So version 17 is the latest version that we just compiled using the home Java version that we just updated. So now that we have we've compiled and created the WAR file using Harvest, we're going now to deploy from the Harvest IDE. So if we go back to our processes, we're going to deploy. And you can see their deployment is now executing. So if I go to Release Engineer, look at our application, and we're deploying version 2 here. You can see we just started less than a minute ago. We go into the details. We can see that the WAR file came out of the Harvest repository and is being deployed. So if we look at the log, we have completed our deployment to WebSphere. So we've successfully installed our application into WebSphere. So if we go to our Harvest view here and refresh, we have Harvest version number 2. So as you can see, we've compiled the code using the source code from Harvest. We've taken the binary results, the artifact, which is the WAR file, checked that into Harvest. Then we manually performed a deployment from Harvest using Release Engineer out to the WebSphere server. So we've completed everything from the Harvest integration of Meister and Release Engineer using files inside of and deployed from the Harvest repository. Now we're going to go ahead and go and repeat the same process for Endevor. And let me bring up the mainframe. So on this, we are going to make a similar change to the Harvest side, to the Endevor side. So I'm editing files in USS, and we're going to then check them in to the MVS side, and they will reside in a library, just like Endevor has libraries. So we're gonna check in our source code into a library that exists on the MVS side. We go and make our source code change. And you can see here we're at version 1. Or make that version 2. And now I'm going to check in. I have a batch file that I've created to make my check-in simplified. So in this case, because we're dealing with Java code that's in the HFS format, we've packaged together those files into what is called a PAX file. A PAX file is an archive file that we use to store as a PDS member. So if we go over to our libraries, what we've done is we've moved our changes into the dev source area. So this is our PAX file containing all of our source code changes right here. So now we're going to go ahead and pull and perform a build using Meister for ZOS to perform the build. So on this side, we have TGTs just like you have on the distributed side. If you look at our TGT, we have two pieces of input that are going into this WAR file. One is the actual Java source code that needs to be compiled. The other part of it is the web content, such as the GIF files, the additional jar files, HTML files. So we have two dependencies that are going to be used for this WAR. So let me go ahead and initiate a build. So I'm just building this one target, which is going to be our WAR file. So you can see that we've submitted our job, and I'm going to flip over. So here we've run the build, make, and OM steps, just like you have on the distributed side. And we've picked up our working directory and our other directories that we're going to be looking at in order to define source code. And this, just like Endevor's processors, can be done on a first found basis through your library concatenation. So we submitted our build there. This is our last job here. And we'll see the output of our compile process. So we did our compile, and then we added, like I said, the web contents and our classes all into the WAR file. So if we go back to our Endevor, in our WAR file directory, our library here, we have our definition WAR file. So I'm going to go to Release Engineer, and I'm going to execute a deployment that's going to pull the WAR file from the mainframe, which is this file that we just looked at, and it's going to push it out to our WebSphere server and deploy that WAR file against WebSphere. So you can see that we pulled it from Endevor, and it's being pushed out right now. It's almost done here. And if you look at our Endevor page, we have version 2 now has been deployed. So this WAR file that we're looking at was derived from the source code change that I made on USS, which is over here. So I made the source code change in USS. I checked it into Endevor as a member in a PDS. I built it using Meister and then deployed it using Release Engineer. So let's go and do the final one, which is for Rational Team Concert. You've seen a demo of this before, but we'll just go ahead and make the change again. And we'll check this in. So we have our source code change now checked into RTC, and I'm going to execute the Meister build from RTC. So request a build. And this will take a few seconds for Rational to pick it up. And we can see from inside of RTC our build executing. And this workflow is going to publish the resulting artifact back into Rational Team Concert. So as soon as this finishes, we'll refresh here, look at our results. We have our Meister log here, and if we look at our record downloads, we can see we have our WAR file that was just built from the source code that was checked into Team Concert. I'm going to go ahead and kick off a deployment now. So we're going to deploy this WAR file from Team Concert using Release Engineer. Just waiting for Team Concert to pick up the request to build. And again, you can see we go over to Release Engineer, and this one we're doing is Team Concert version 2. You can see we pulled our artifact from the repository, and we're deploying. This is going to be done here in a second. And if we refresh, we have version 2. So as you can see, we've deployed from Harvest, we've deployed from Team Concert, and we've deployed from Endevor. So we've actually built and deployed from the 3 separate locations of the source code and binaries. We're going to now go ahead and roll back each one of these deployments. So we're going to roll back to version 1. In order to do that, I just go and redeploy the earlier version, and Release Engineer will figure out automatically for you all the different components that need to be applied and in what order. So here we're going to bring everything back. So we're actually going back out to the mainframe repository, back out to Endevor, and pulling the -1 of the WAR file from Endevor and deploying that. So just waiting for the WebSphere server to update. Okay, so that has been completed, and that was for Endevor. So if we look at the Endevor page, we're back at version 1. Now let's go ahead and do that for Harvest. We'll deploy the -1. And again, this is going out to the Harvest repository and pulling the -1 version of the WAR file. So we're going to redeploy that WAR file. This time we pull it from the Harvest repository. Look at our log. Our distribution is just finishing up here. And if we look at Harvest, should be finished by now. We're back to Harvest version 1. Finally, let's go ahead and deploy the -1 for Team Concert. And we're pulling out the -1 of our artifact from the Team Concert repository. One more refresh. Just waiting on WebSphere to start. If we go look at our website, we're back to version 1. So now we have the Team Concerts at version 1, Harvest at version 1, and also Endevors at version 1. Now let's go ahead and perform a release deployment. So in this case, I'm going to deploy version 2 of all the different applications. So I'm going to deploy Harvest, the WAR file from Harvest, and deploy the WAR file from Team Concert. I'm going to deploy the WAR file from Endevor. And this is all packaged together into a release. So I will perform that deployment. So we're pulling from the Harvest repository for the first one. And if we look at the log, you'll see that we're going through each one of the applications. So in this case, we're going through the Harvest. And because we're deploying version 2, we're going out to the Harvest repository for that version and pulling that from the repository and deploying it. So we have our Harvest deployment. Let me go back up and refresh. And you can see that we have our RTC is being deployed. So if you look at our detailed log here, we'll see that we've packaged together the RTC as well. And that's this WAR file here. And finally, we're bringing the WAR file from Endevor. So we have, in a single release, we're not only deploying the WAR file from individual repositories, but you can combine together any source repository that you want. So you can mix and match Harvest repositories and Endevor repositories and Team Concert repositories. When the Release Engineer packaging feature, we enable you to do that very easily. So if we look at our log, we'll go down to the bottom here, we should have our completion. So if we go look at our web pages, this should all say version 2. So Endevor is now at version 2. Team Concerts at version 2. And Harvest is at version 2. Just like we were able to roll forward or deploy at a release level, we can also roll back at a release level. So we're going to roll back to the N-1 of all of our applications. So let me kick this off. And you can see that we're going to deploy -1, -1 and -1 of the all the applications in a single release. So if we go to our timeline here, and we go ahead and refresh, we can see that we're pulling out the Harvest repository, and now we're working on the Team Concert. So here, we'll go ahead and double check our log one more time. And we've pulled out our Endevor staging. Let's see if we finished here yet. No, not quite yet. We're just waiting on WebSphere a little bit. So we're doing the final application deployment here. And we've finished our deployment. So if we go back to our web pages and we refresh, we've gone back to the earlier version. So Endevor's rolled back to version 1. We've rolled back Team Concert to version 1. And we've rolled back Harvest to version 1. So in the ability to package applications together, that enables you to roll forward or roll backwards as well. Or as we did earlier, you can roll forward or roll backwards individual application versions. So you have that flexibility on how you put things together. You can pick and choose what you want to go and what needs to be rolled back. So if one of the applications didn't work in a release, you can manually go and roll back just that one application and keep the other ones at their current level. So you have that total flexibility to be able to package together and release as a complete package. So initially what we did was we did our source code change to Harvest. We checked that in. We triggered a build from Harvest, and the resulting binaries, artifacts were checked back into the Harvest repository. We then triggered a release engineer deployment from Harvest, and that deployed out to our WebSphere server. That was our first scenario. Our second scenario was with Endevor. So we went and did the same change. So we made a change to source code on the mainframe. We checked that into Endevor. We then initiated a Meister build, which pulled the files from Endevor, compiled them, and put the resulting binaries back into Endevor. From there, we triggered a deployment consuming the binaries from Endevor using Release Engineer. And that deployment went out to our WebSphere server as well. Then our last scenario that we did was we made a source code change to RTC, inside of RTC, checked that in. Then we triggered a Meister build from inside of RTC. That build put the resulting binaries back into Team Concert. We then triggered a release engineer deployment from inside of RTC, which deployed the files out to our web server. And then finally, we went and did rollbacks, putting the N-1 of each one of our applications and pulling the corresponding binaries from their appropriate repository. After that, we did our release engineer deployment using a release. So we packaged together all of our pieces and put those into a release package. So we deployed all pieces at once out to our WebSphere server. And that release pulled the appropriate pieces from the corresponding repositories. And finally, the way we wrapped up the demo was we actually deployed the N-1 at a release level. So we went and pulled the N-1 from Harvest, from RTC and Endevor at a release package level and deployed that out to the WebSphere servers. So I believe we have covered everything that was indicated to us that was you'd like to see. If there's anything, any questions or any other scenarios, please let us know and we'll be sure to show you that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. It was a great demo.